In the previous lesson, we had to avoid one TypeScript error related to seconds to complete property inside activity item component. In here, we are trying to assign event payload stored inside $event variable to seconds to complete property, which is actually of number type, but the event payload can be either number, string, or null. So in this lesson, we're going to fix this type inconsistency. Let's get rid of this cast into type any. And now let's take a look at the declaration of the event select inside base select component. As we can see in here, we have earlier specified that the payload of this event can be a union of three types. But this payload type will be actually dependent on another property we're passing inside of this component, specifically options property. So we can resolve this type inconsistency by using a generic component feature. So to convert this component into a generic component, we can use special attribute called generic on this script tag like this. And just like we usually create generic functions or generic classes by using TypeScript generics, we can also use generic components. So in here, we're going to use a similar syntax to define generic type argument, which is usually called T. And just to be more specific, what types this generic type can receive, we're going to extend this type by using the following syntax. And this is going to ensure that parameter T can be either of number type or string type. So now, anytime we're using a union of these types, we're going to go through this component and replace all such unions by using our newly created generic type T right here, also for the property selected, and also for the payload of the event select, like this. And now, based on the usage of base select component, and based on the value we're going to pass to property called options, TypeScript is actually going to automatically infer proper type for generic type argument based on the type of the key value. And just to better understand how this is going to work, let's see where this period select option value comes from and what shape it has. So in order to generate value for period select options constant, we're calling the function generate period select option. So we have to take a look at the definition of this function inside functions.ts. And right here we can see that the return value of this function is of another generic type called select option. Let's take a look at the definition of this type. As we can see, it consists of two properties, value as well as the label. And one of these properties actually has a generic type. And when we are using base select component right here, we can see that generic type argument was inferred, and instead of the generic type argument, number type was used. So then this type will be propagated down to base select component and used instead of this generic T type. So basically, when we're using this component, generic type T will be replaced on the number type. And eventually what this is going to give us is that this $event payload will now be more concrete type, which will be either number or null. And as we can see, $event variable has a type of number or null, which is completely compatible with the type of seconds to complete property. And there is no more TypeScript error in this case. But there is one little thing we can improve by going to base select component. So let's take a look at the shape of this select option object. This object is very similar to the definition of select option interface. So why don't we just use this interface instead of repeatedly describing this shape right here? But just because this interface also expects one generic type argument, let's just pass over our generic type T to this type argument like this. And while we're importing this type select option, let's use type keyword to highlight that this is a type. So in this lesson, we have used the pretty cool feature of TypeScript in combination with Vue, which is generic components, which lets us use more specific types inside our components.